Welcome. I'm John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Tonight, well, president after president after president of the Colorado State Senate. A little later on, Bill Cadman joins me, but first, the guy who made my job possible, John Andrews. Again, thank you for founding the Independence Institute. Otherwise, the only thing I'd be saying into a microphone is, would you like fries with that?
Good to be with you, John. I just done think tank after think tank, 5 of them and counting. I'm going to keep at it until I get it right.
All right, let me see if I got this right. You started with Chavano Institute.
Of Hillsdale College, that's right.
Right, and then there was,
of course, gave birth to Independence Institute.
You went to Texas Public Policy.
I did, and I learned that you cannot transplant into the political culture of Texas from that of another state. The organ transplant was violently rejected by the body politic in Texas. Then there was Claremont Institute after leaving my service in the state Senate. Most recently, a fun run of 7 years with Centennial Institute at Colorado Christian University and inventing the Western Conservative Summit, which has been a lot of fun.
I mean, the Western Conservative Summit has turned into the Woodstock of conservative politics in the West. This is CPAC in Colorado.
It is the biggest annual gathering of conservatives outside Washington, D.C., John. July 1, 2, and 3 at the Colorado Convention Center coming up this summer. It'll be 2 weeks ahead of the Republican nominating battle in Cleveland. We don't even know if the battle will be settled as of that 4th of July holiday in 2016. It's the place to be once again for the 7th consecutive year of Western Conservative Summit.
And because you're not a busybody enough, you of course were a state senator, you were a Senate president, you ran for governor against...
Got schooled by Roy Romer. Yes,
who hasn't been schooled by Roy Romer. This is what happens when you're an overachiever.
I fell in love with American politics as a high school kid growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, and spending my summers in the high country at Buena Vista, Colorado. Got here full-time to Colorado as fast as I could as a refugee from the crumbling ruins of the Nixon White House in the early 70s.
You were a speechwriter for Nixon?
I started in the press office under Press Secretary Ron Ziegler for 1 year, and then I was on Nixon's speechwriting staff for 3 years with great names like Patrick Buchanan and John McLaughlin and William Safire and Ben Stein.
How cool was that?
It was a fascinating experience until it all went sour with Nixon shooting himself in both feet and every place else he could shoot himself with the Watergate scandal and becoming the only president to resign.
But why not stay in that little cloister of D.C.? I know people who
I had
get
to
the
choose
political
between
bug.
reality and Washington, D.C. It was no contest. My heart was in the West. I'm a Heartland guy. And I have deep distaste for the place where big government lives, even though we've got to send the best people there that we can. I figured I'd done my service, and I got to Colorado as fast as I could, and I've just loved the 40 years here.
You know, people might not quite understand the impact you've had, not only getting me a job, again, thanks, but that what you started with the Independence Institute, and before that, Chavano, was a movement of state-based politics, of not just Cato and Heritage and AEI and CEI and all that DC-centered thought, but actually finding ways to turn that around.
Here we are in the 1980s. It's the Reagan Revolution, and part of his revolutionary vision was to decentralize power, restore the constitutional balance between the states and the federal government, where ideally the states come first and the federal government is a creature and servant of the states. Well, it was time for a baby heritage foundation, if you will, to get on its feet in some of the states. Colorado, Washington State, South Carolina, Illinois were the first 4 to do that in about 1985. And now, as you know, the map has covered every state and some of them several free market, conservative libertarian think tanks across the whole map. Enough that the left is very, very concerned about this thing that's grown up around what we call State Policy Network. I helped to found that as well, and then you've been a leader in that movement yourself.
It's just an amazing legacy, and it's bigger than people realize, and things start, and it started 1985 is when
85 was when Independence Institute opened its doors the 1st of June. You threw an appropriate celebration for turning 30 years old at Independence Institute last summer, as I recall.
It was a good time. All right, let's talk about what you've been doing lately, which is, of course, writing. You've always loved writing, and you got challenged to actually write the book you were meant to write a few years ago, and you put together your first book. It did well.
Well, I brought out Responsibility Reborn, A Citizen's Guide to the Next American Century in 2011 during my years at Centennial Institute and Western Conservative Summit, and along the way, in looking at the young people that we're training up through Colorado Christian University and the Western Conservative Summit and the kids that work with you at Independence Institute, the next generation to defend freedom, I realized we could benefit from a book that would summarize what does a Colorado freedom advocate look like and what would a right turn for Colorado look like. And I collected 150 quick reads, 2-page pieces of mine from other publications over the last decade, wrapped them together around my imaginary hometown in the high country, little town called Backbone, Colorado, USA. That's the book.
All right, and again, keeping with the same thought of taking big issues but localizing them, Backbone Colorado basically does the same thing. That we love, particularly conservatives, I think, love talking about D.C., love talking about who's going to be the next president, who's going to all this great stuff. But the world of change is right under
If we're going to
feet.
save this country, it's coming from the bottom up. Washington, D.C. is always a lagging indicator. The politicians in Washington, unfortunately, Republican as well as Democrat, will only do the right thing if they're dragged kicking and screaming by a mass popular movement that first finds its expression not just in states like Colorado, but in localities like Douglas County Schools or Jefferson County Schools, win some, lose some. But those battles that get fought in localities, battles that get fought in the overlooked 4th largest government of Colorado, where you cut your teeth politically, RTD, bottom up, less government, more freedom, more accountability, more consumer choice, more markets, more personal responsibility as the price of our individual freedom. It all has to happen from where we are right here, and that's the Backbone Colorado theme. It's backbone of the continent, the Continental Divide that we see every morning, the glorious view looking west from the Front Range. But then, more symbolically, the backbone of our liberties is our Constitution, our U.S. Constitution, our state Constitution. And in turn, the backbone of making those things work is individual character. So on different levels, my hometown of the heart in the high country, you won't find it on any map, but it's in here and in there with you, Backbone Colorado, USA. I'm inviting everybody to come and figuratively live there with you and me.
It's right next to Galt's Gulch.
I was complimented when Alan West, the former congressman, we hope he becomes a senator one of these days from Florida, now runs a think tank like you and me called National Center for Policy Analysis. Alan West said of my book, Backbone Colorado, John Andrews is a John Galt kind of a guy. What a compliment to try to live up to.
The theme, though, throughout your career has been, and the book does the same thing, taking these huge, heady, big issues of freedom, of independence, of responsibility, and touching them with the soil that you're standing on, which is to make them real on a local level. And this wasn't Backbone USA, it's Backbone Colorado. Why Colorado? Why localities? Well,
our neighbors in Kansas or Utah or Wyoming have got their own proud heritage and their own claim to values that distinguish their state, pioneer values brought into the space age, the iPhone age. But Colorado, I think there is a particular elevated spirit that we get from being a mile high and looking at summits almost 3 miles high. And figuratively, we have the opportunity to govern ourselves as the founders intended, the founders of America in 1776 and the founders of Colorado in 1876, with constitutional limited government fueled by the character of individuals who cherish their freedom and exercise their responsibility. There's a special opportunity in Colorado. You mentioned Galt's Gulch from Ayn Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged. One of the themes in there, and I write about it in this book in a couple of chapters, John, is that Ayn Rand has a character say in Atlas Shrugged, Colorado may be our last chance. The turnaround begins in Colorado, almost like Peyton Manning saying on TV, the epic comeback starts right here.
All right, let's add some meat to the skeleton of the backbone. What's the biggest issue you think facing the state of Colorado? And try to be specific.
One of the biggest issues woven through the 10-year chronicle and handbook that we're talking about here, my Backbone book, is, as Churchill puts it, does the government own the people or do the people own the government? In Colorado, that is manifested in our Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, the gold standard, as you know, nationally for tax and spending limitations, where we, the people, have to give our permission for taxes and borrowing by government and our permission for government to grow faster than population plus inflation. There is a bipartisan coalition forming to blow the lid off that with ballot issues this fall, and the opening act of it is going on in the Colorado General Assembly right now and all the way through May. Will they be able to breach Tabor to the tune of hiding $750 million from what ought to be taxpayer accountability and ultimately taxpayer refunds? The battle of whether we own the government or the government owns us is played out in Tabor and the Taxpayer Bill of Rights in real time in Colorado 2016. Do we have the backbone to fight and win that battle?
Yeah. The older I get, the more I see generations and history starting to build upon itself. That the Independence Institute.
It's scary when you're old enough to say,
I
I've
know.
seen this movie before.
I've seen this play before. But Independence Institute is one of the reasons we have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
Absolutely.
It's one of the reasons we have term limits. It's one of the reasons we have these checks and balances in government. And we've seen Tabor eroded over the years, mostly through terrible court decisions, and there's never been a positive court decision on Tabor.
Topped off by the cherry, let us say, of Referendum C in 2005, again
Right.
with the Republicans sadly leading the charge.
And people don't understand quite the history because they weren't there of what made this law so important. Government was growing at an exponential
Twice
rate.
the pace of the private sector in the 80s, from the year that Independence Institute got started in 85 up to the year that Tabor passed in 92. Government was adding jobs twice as fast as the private sector and ballooning its bulk twice as fast as the private sector. If you extrapolate those trends through the 90s and into today in the early 21st century, we could look a whole lot like Illinois or New York or California. Thank God for Tabor.
Tabor saved this state. And instead of having a yearly celebration, we have a yearly torturing of the legislature trying to do something to make an end run
John,
around
the
it.
passing parade of people moving to Colorado, older folks leaving the political arena, youngsters maturing and getting the vote. A lot of people that ought to know how lucky we are to have the Taxpayers Bill of Rights don't even know that that's what the Tabor acronym stands for. As often as I can, and it's woven throughout this Backbone book, I remind people TABOR is just short for Taxpayers Bill of Rights. They have to ask our permission to tax, to borrow, to spend.
And the left or the right can grow government as large as they like.
They just
as
have to
big
make
as they
the
want.
sale with We the People.
They just have to ask first. All right, Backbone USA, available on Amazon, I'm assuming.
Of course, in paper as you have it in your hand, or the Kindle edition for the hip people who want to read electronically. It is a handbook of what a freedom fighter in Colorado looks like and what would a right turn for this state in 2016 and beyond, what would that look like?
John Andrews, you're a hero and a mentor to me and a lot of other people.
Fun to be with you, John. Thank you.
Stay tuned.